Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
A voice from the past coming to you from the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker Live. I'm Derek Gilbert. We'll explain exactly what I'm talking about here in just a couple of minutes. Assuming that all the technology is working the way it should, you are hearing me from the past projecting into the future via modern technology as we bring you a special program tonight about the use of fiction to expose the fiction of the modern UFO phenomenon and its intersection with end times Bible prophecy. Our guest tonight in the interview segment, Darrin Geisinger, the author of Zero G's The Armor Eternal, and the coordinator of the True Legends Conference coming back to Branson in September. We'll talk about that as well. And meanwhile, we welcome you to the broadcast for March 31st, 2019. I'm Derek Gilbert, and recording this a few days in advance, because as you hear this, if you're listening live at the usual locations, Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Spotify.com, or vftb.net, we're actually in Dallas at the Hear the Watchman Conference. Sharon and I there with the wonderful gathering, and we'll tell you again at the end of the program about... it's not too late to subscribe to get the high-definition streaming video. So we'll talk about that before the end of the program tonight. But don't forget, if you're listening in the archives from the website, vftb.net, that's great. But, of course, you can subscribe via any major podcatcher at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify. We're there, and we've got links to all of those places to subscribe at the website, vftb.net. That guarantees you never miss a program because they download straight to whatever you're using to catch the podcasts, whether it's a desktop machine, laptop, or smartphone or tablet. It works on any one of those, but of course the easiest way to do it is to just download our free mobile app. Get the mobile app if you've got an iOS device, an iPad, iPod Touch, iPhone, or an Android device. We got a free app for both of those, and that gets you access to all of our archives from vftb.net, the View from the Bunker. Oh, and also, we've got a free mobile app for our weekly Bible study, by the way. All of our archives from the Gilbert House Fellowship going back to Genesis 1:1, and we finally, after 4.5 years, just made it all the way through the Bible. So, download the free mobile app there at gilberthouse.org, and then again, just to peruse the archives at your convenience. Of course, our website is vftb.net. We also supply this audio to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. And you'll find us on social media, facebook.com/viewfromthebunker. You can find us on Twitter at viewfrombunker, or my personal Twitter feed, which is at Derek Gilbert, DEREK, if you're not sure how to spell that. And oneway.com, that's a new social media site, which is sort of like a combination of the best of Facebook and Twitter. Oneway.com, and no ads, by the way, plus run by a Christian, so you don't get the filtering and the shadow banning. OneWay.com at Derek P. Gilbert. You'll find me there. Well, this is a topic that we've been interested in for quite a long time. I'm a science fiction fan from way back. And as a teen, just thought that our future was more like Star Trek than, say, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, which had a lot of religious overtones. But it's become clear that the modern UFO phenomenon, even as far back as the early 50s, as people were really beginning to absorb what they thought had happened, or what they had been told had happened at Roswell, that this is really more of a spiritual or metaphysical quest than it is a search for the technology that will allow us to explore the stars. It really is a New Age religion with a science fiction veneer, the modern UFO phenomenon. That's why Josh Peck and I wrote the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, in which we not only, and Josh handled this portion of it, explored the connections between high-ranking and very powerful members of the United States government, and specifically the Obama administration, because of the release of John Podesta's emails. Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign chair and very interested in the UFO phenomenon, but interested in it as an answer to the big questions that have plagued humanity since the beginning of time. Where do we come from? Why are we here? And what happens to us when we die? The late Apollo astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell had been in touch with Podesta, trying to get a meeting with President Obama to convince him that people on Earth are in touch with entities, some of which are faithful to God, as Dr. Mitchell understood it, and others who are not. Now, bear in mind, Dr. Mitchell was a New Ager from way back. He's the co-founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which was featured in Dan Brown's novel, The Lost Symbol, which is sort of his love letter to Freemasonry. But ions features very prominently in it. And its mission was essentially researching scientific ways to contact the spirit realm, or as our friend Dr. Future used to say, looking for scientific ways to become possessed. That's Dr. Mitchell's background. He's fascinated with the paranormal, with the spirit realm for a long, long time, and he was convinced that our space brothers had held the key. And he wanted John Podesta to facilitate a meeting with Barack Obama. As far as we know, it never happened. Don't even know if Podesta ever responded to Dr. Mitchell before his passing. So, but it was interesting that somebody at that level of government has connections and contacts with people who are pursuing this line of inquiry. Now, the part of the book that I dealt with really dug into the spiritual background of the modern UFO phenomenon and showed how the modern ancient aliens meme, which is only about 40 years old, about 50 years old now, actually, with the first printing of Eric von Daniken's work, Chariots of the Gods. But when you look at where he drew his inspiration and you follow the chain of evidence backward, you see that you can draw a straight line, not only to the occult teachings of Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, and Aleister Crowley, who founded an occult system that was then developed by one of his devotees, Kenneth Grant, into what he called the Typhonian Order, the Typhonian tradition, which essentially venerates chaos. You can see how that connects through the horror fiction, believe it or not, of H.P. Lovecraft. This Lovecraft, who claimed to be an atheist, was happy to draw on Thelema and Theosophy as inspiration for his short stories, like, Cthulhu and other things like that, At the Mountains of Madness. That inspired other works of, shall we say, pseudo-archaeology into lost continents and gods who were really space travelers. And that wound up in the mind and on the desk of Eric von Daniken, who basically repackaged it into Chariots of the Gods, which has now become the almost a received text, a religious text for the modern ancient aliens movement. So the reason we deal with this, Sharon and me, our colleagues at Skywatch TV, and our friends like L.A. Marzulli and others, is because there are more people in America who believe we're being visited by extraterrestrials than believe in God as he revealed himself in the Bible. This is not hyperbole. This is not me making stuff up. This is the truth. When you look at statistics, surveys of what people actually believe. When you look at the number of Americans who say that they're Christians, okay, it's a majority. But when you start testing what they believe, asking questions about doctrine, you find out that only about 9% of Americans hold a biblical worldview. Only about 9% of Americans hold a biblical worldview, which, according to the Barna Group, means believing in 6 tenets of the faith that are really Christianity 101. That Jesus literally died, literally rose from the dead, lived a sinless life. Satan is a literal entity and not just a concept or a force. Things like that. But there are 36% of Americans who believe that we're being visited by extraterrestrials. So think about that. In America today, adult Americans are 4 times more likely to believe in ET than to believe in God as he is revealed in Scripture. Most of the rest of the people who believe or say that they're Christians may in fact be saved by, the blood of Jesus Christ. It's just they have a really fuzzy idea about what Christian doctrine is. So anyway, that's why we deal with this, because this phenomenon, this modern UFO phenomenon, and the belief in ancient astronauts is really a metaphysical quest. It is a false religion, and there are those who are involved in it. Some of the leading names in the modern UFO phenomenon have no qualms about telling people that's what they're doing. Our space brothers are here to show us the way to humanity 2.0, to help us elevate the species to our next level of human development, next level of evolution. And as Christians, we really, really need to have an answer for this. And most churches, and I don't mean this to insult pastors, but for most pastors, this is really outside their area of expertise. They don't find it interesting, so they don't have answers to it. It's weird. It's strange. And frankly, most pastors are so overwhelmed as far as their time commitments. They just don't have time to do the research into this. So that's why we deal with it, so they don't have to. And our guest tonight in the interview segment is someone who has been digging into this for a long time himself and has decided to use the tool that many of the evangelists of the ancient aliens gospel use to propagate the meme. Fiction. It's sad but true that most of us, when we read an engaging story with compelling characters whom we identify with, are more likely to absorb ideas and concepts than if we're reading them in a work of nonfiction. For example, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. I tried reading that book years ago and decided either I was really slow or the book was really badly written because I just could not understand the chain of logic that was being presented. See, Jesus didn't really die, went off to the south of France with Mary Magdalene and retired and fathered the kings of France? Yeah, I couldn't buy it. A lot of people couldn't buy it until they read Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code. Then suddenly, this all makes sense now, because it was presented as an engaging, compelling, exciting story with characters that people liked, and hence a lot of people then wind up visiting Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, trying to find the secret answer in the location of the Holy Grail. Well, it doesn't really work that way. But hey, Jesus told parables to make his points, so why can't we use fiction likewise? And our guest has done that. We talk with Darrin Geisinger next as A View from the Bunker continues. I'm Derek Gilbert.
Jack the Ripper's dark deeds actually began long before 1888. And it wasn't a mere man who committed the crimes, but a demon in league with devilish men, a group of men called Red Wing. Only one small group of valiant men and women stand against this evil, a group that place their faith in Christ alone, and they protect a secret of blood that Red Wing hopes to use to usher in the reign of Antichrist and the end of day.
Red Wing is called Red Wing because they want to kill the church. They want to forever stop Christ from coming back. So it's the Holy Spirit, the dove, with a murdered, has been slain, a wounded dove. Ultimately, we still have to remember that the one who is in control is God Almighty, and we have to go to Him, and we have to suit up every time we go out.
The Red Wing Saga by Sharon K. Gilbert.
Book 1.
Blood Lies.
Book 2.
Blood Rights.
Book 3.
The Blood is the Life.
Book 4.
Realms of Stone.
And now available Book 5.
Realms of Fire. Available at SkywatchTVStore.com. Paperback and Kindle at Amazon.com. Characters you'll love and a story you can't put down. The Red Wing Saga by Sharon K. Gilbert.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
Imagine stepping outside on your deck to just enjoy the night air and suddenly finding yourself floating away into space. That's how the novel from our guest this week opens up. We are talking with a gentleman who is extremely creative. He writes, he's a graphic designer. He's also one of those rare creative types who's also very coordinated because he's the coordinator of the True Legends conferences. And we'll talk about the conference in 2019 coming back to Branson, and his novel, which is a fascinating read because he incorporates a lot of real stuff, research. It's what Dr. Michael Heiser would call faction. It's got a lot of fact in the fiction. The novel is Zero G's Part 1, The Armor Eternal. We welcome Darrin Geisinger to the program for the first time.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
Well, this is, and full disclosure, as you're hearing this, of course, Sharon and I are in Dallas at the Hear the Watchman conference, so we're recording this in advance, but we also wanted to get a jump on really starting to talk up the conference coming to Branson in September. We'll get to that as we dig into this a little bit, because it all relates to the topic that you're writing about.
Yes.
Approaching the subject of
the alien question.
Yes, the alien question, and doing it from a Christian perspective. But the concept of gravity, which we would assume to be a constant, why did you use that as a jumping off point to create the crisis that required intervention from, say, beyond?
That goes back many moons now, and I have to credit my wife, Nikki, for that. We were back in Cleveland, Ohio, where we're from, but we've made a couple moves since then. I remember us being in our living room, and she said from her chair, I was standing in the living room, she was sitting, she said, what would happen if we started to lose our gravity? And I just remember looking up into space right then and thinking, wow, what kind of a story would that be? Now, put a pin in that. I actually forgot about that whole concept, and it wasn't until years later that I was getting ready to write a fiction book and it was going to include a lot of facts, as you stated, research that you are into and Tom Horn and others are into. When I heard Steve Quayle on the Hagman show say in the end times he felt like gravitational phenomenon, and when the earth would wobble to and fro would be part of the end times. And so that memory of wanting to include that, the gravitational phenomenon, the anomalies, or losing our gravity came back to me. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to write a fiction book, what if losing our gravity was part of the end times lying signs and wonders from the enemy, which I don't really talk about. I don't usually reveal that, but I will tell people if they're wondering why the gravity thing, but it's part of the lying signs and wonders.
Okay. So your hero, and you write it in first person style, which is how I approached my first novel. You cast the character as a young man, Garrett, and he has to contend with this situation. So again, you got the lying signs and wonders. How do you then characterize the, or rather, shall we say this? How do the saviors who come from, beyond, present themselves to the world, and why is the world so eager to accept their help?
Well, I pitched the story starts as it's in 2045. And essentially, the entire world is coming out of a 10-year economic global meltdown. So,
which is entirely plausible when you look at how much debt the world's economy is built on right now.
We are in a very tall, teetering house of cards. And so what I've visualized is the phoenix of the one world government, one world religion, all being birthed out of the ashes of this global economic meltdown. And essentially, once you lose your power, once you lose your food, sustainability, anything can be rolled out. It's the Hegelian dialectic: present the problem, then offer the solution. And when people just want to eat again, when people just want to be comfortable again, whatever solution arrives on the scene, they're going to be standing in line for it. So I know that a lot of people are postulating that the alien saviors might arrive at any time. We could click on the news and here they are hovering over a city. I don't see it that way. There's too much that can go wrong. If in fact that this is a plot to deceive people at the end times. So I've really imagined melt everything down. People do not have basic needs. And they actually,
basic needs.
And they come and save us. So my story, this fictional story, shows that the alien saviors have actually intervened via some intergalactic last resort clause that we were going to destroy ourselves. We were on the brink, and they're not allowed to interfere unless a certain situation is unfolding. And so they're watching us. They see that we're about to go into darkness and extinct ourselves. So they come in, they step in. Well, who do they out? They out the Illuminati, actually. They out the politicians, the movie stars. They say, look, these people were in collusion to depopulate, to destroy their own race. And so they save us from ourselves.
That's a really interesting concept, because I'm thinking along the lines, and I don't want to derail the conversation, but it seems to me that there's going to be somebody who's thrown under the bus here to validate the claims of these end time saviors as authentic. You know, we're the Messiah. You know, here's your Messiah. This is an interesting concept, and again, based on some plausible scenario, as you say, we're teetering on a pyramid of debt that is much too narrow at the base and much too tall. Why do you think? Let me ask you this. I know why I think what I think about the end times. Why do you think these so-called saviors would be willing to throw what we would assume would be their most faithful servants, the politicians and the movie stars and the musicians and so forth, who have helped to corrupt our social morals, the fabric of society? Why would they, toss them up as a sacrifice and offer them up
to win our hearts, Derek? To win our hearts, because the deception is going to be great. That's why they call it the Great Deception, and these people will be saving us and feeding us again, and saving our race. Essentially, they'll win the hearts and minds of the population, and throwing the Illuminati under. We don't. Humankind doesn't trust. If right now, if you just ask the average person on the street, is there an elite who really hates us and would rather see us taken out? I think most people would say, yeah, they're out there. They really, but we spend money, and so that's why they keep us around. But honestly, people don't trust the banksters. Who trusts Wall Street? Who trusts the elite? Who trusts Hollywood? No one really does. And so when these alien saviors pull back the curtain, so to speak, I just think that it wins people. Well, you're feeding us again, and now this is our true enemies. And so that's why there's it's the one world government, the one world religion is also being born at the same time as a kind of a neo-socialistic feel of everybody share everything with everybody. We're gonna take we're gonna bring us into a new golden age of humanity, not only when the gods, lower G, are mingling with men again, but where capitalism is dead now, and we're going to do it right this time, and we're not going to do what the Illuminati did and use everybody to build their empires. It's going to be share everything. So it's a really hard deception to refute. You're eating again. You're sharing again. It's like a birth of something brand new. And so I feel like it has to come out of total destruction, because I just don't see how they ease into it.
So as part of the deception, then, how would these saviors portray what they've done and integrate it into what people know about end times Bible prophecy?
Well, there's very few people who are left who are still tracking that. People are just happy to be eating again. But the messengers, in which I call the ETs that are our saviors, are remaining hidden, because it's really, quote unquote, not about them. It's about us. It's about them just jumping in a little bit, get us back on track, because if we follow their advice, we will avoid the problems that almost extincted them thousands and thousands of years ago, and we will then join them in the stars and be saviors and gods in our own time and save other races. It's this whole cruddy deception, and it's outlined in the story, and and they stay hidden, and they're really just working through the UN and select these temporary governing bodies. And so there's a council of resplendent light that is chosen from among mankind. It's like 300 average, dentists, beauticians, sewer workers, who are now going to be this body who meets with the messengers and takes their advice and edicts and tells humanity, just your average, so that the politicians and the elite are never duplicated again. So again, Derek, it's just very deceiving, because now you're hearing what we should do as a race from Joe Sixpack instead of this
professional politician class.
Right.
Yeah. For people who don't catch the reference there, why did you choose to call these ETs messengers?
Well, what they do hand in this first book is the first 12 of 36 truisms that they're going to bestow on mankind. And what they say that this was basically the fundamental things that saved their race thousands of years ago. They were going to destroy themselves via weapons, via mismanagement and corruption. And so this is what saved them. And so in book 1, the first 12 are handed out. And honestly, Derek, I should just prayer these came to me. And when I was writing them down of what fake alien saviors would hand mankind as their first 12 truisms, I will reveal this, is that truism 7 is ending religion, because it's basically, we gave you this a long time ago. We sent these prophets or whatever, what you call, Muhammad or Jesus or whatever. And the things that we wanted to use those to unite you only divided you. There is no hateful, vindictive God. No one has more truth than the other. Everybody's can be true. And so to save you, and I just think that 7, I just think that the truism 7 ending religion is just one of the big hammers that comes down. And, well, it's what we've talked about in so many books with Tom Horn and Exo Vaticana, and the alien saviors are going to come and change all of religion as we know it.
And actually, I was thinking that messengers was just a reference to the old Hebrew term for the lowest class of angel, Malachim, which means messenger.
You're right, and that's how do they tie to the fallen angels? Well, I'm not sure if I'll reveal that. I'll have to see how your questions unroll here.
Well, you've got a lot of interesting references here that deal with topics that have come up in ufology over the last 100 years or so, and go back even to secret society type stuff. For example, the Vril. Why did you include who are the Vril in our reality, and why did you choose to include the Vril in Zero G's?
I have a different take on the Vril a little bit. And the Vril Society was in the Nazi Party. The Vril Maidens was this religious group of seance, psychics, mediums that were channeling messages that they were getting. And supposedly that was the way that the Nazis got some of the high tech that they started to unfold and unleash towards the end of the war, the Horton Wing and basically people, the Nazi Bell experiment and those things. But in my research, it's not just fictional. In my research, I have a feeling that the Vril are a race that's existing right now that is not human at all, and that they are a type of bipedal reptoid type of creature, and they actually don't care that much about high technology, but they know where it is. And so I know this is blowing some minds out there that are listening to it, but Hitler, in his mass scramble to find all things esoteric, used the Tibetan monks, and this is well known too, through the Vril Society. I think that they were getting their messages from a race called the Vril. And a lot of people think they were humanoid. I actually don't think that they were, and that Hitler traced and got a hold of them, and they pointed him through making shifty deals, dirty deals, showed him where this technology was. So, the Vril Society, I kind of feel, is named for the race that they were in contact, which were the Vril, which were, and this is detailed in the book, it's kind of a tall, long-necked, gray type species, and they made deals with humans to give us this technology. Hitler was the first to get it, and then through Project Paperclip, as everybody's heard about, all those Nazi scientists who had contact with the Vril, who were getting this technology, which was really lost Atlantean technology, that the Vril didn't care that much about, but they knew how to get it. They showed these Nazis where to get it. So that was disseminated through all of the governments of the world. And to put the final twist on it is that when the alien saviors come in my book, they are... well, I won't reveal that, but they actually not only out the Illuminati, out the banksters and politicians, but they throw the Vril under the bus, because by this time, people know more and more about the long-necked grays, about the so-called abduction phenomenon, about something basically under our feet who's been against us. And so not only that, they actually out and they say, well, it's not just disclosure for us. You have to understand, humans, You're one of many, many species in the galaxy. You have to understand what you're up against here. These things were in league with your politicians. These things were in league with there are bad ETs too. And so we are going to save you not only from yourselves, but from the bad ETs. And get ready, because if you're going to be true gods, there's wars to fight. You've got to get ready. You've got to do exactly what we say, because this is what you face out there.
And that's really intriguing, because one of the things that Josh and I discovered as we researched The Day the Earth Stands Still was, and Josh really handled most of this. This was the WikiLeaks releases of John Podesta's email. And the belief among some in the UFO community that there are two categories of alien out there. There are those who are, they think, loyal to God, and then this evil race that what they call the Celestials. And I forget now, because again, this was Josh's aspect. He was doing that. I was digging into the biblical aspect. But it always made me wonder why that would be, where these so-called extraterrestrials who contact humanity, and it's always through telepathy, or what we would call channeling, instead of, they're so technologically advanced, but they can't use a webcam, apparently, that they are channeling this information, spirit, to these spirit guides or
Vril maidens.
Vril maidens, yeah. Right. It didn't hurt their message, by the way, that all of them were very attractive.
No comment.
Yeah. Well, I'm a married man, but I can at least say that much. But this makes sense. If they've set up a false enemy to take the fall, so to establish themselves as the heroes, the saviors of humanity.
Yeah, to feed us again, to restore order, structure. I mean, turn the lights back on and then show us who our true enemies are. Not only like, oh, okay, we knew that those politicians were corrupt all along, but then to show us a scary other entity.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about total loyalty. So now, okay, our ears are open, our eyes are wide open. What do we have to do now? And, just to digress for a second, I don't know if your audience is familiar with the legend of Phil Schneider, the guy who was a geologist and he was part of the Dulce Wars. He claims to have been taken underground and actually shot a tall, long-necked gray who waved its arm in front of its belt and blew his hand off and fingers off. And Phil Schneider was then attempted to be killed 12 times, and they got him on the 13th time. But a lot of people, and I know, you are familiar with the Hollow Earth theory, believe that there are multiple sentient or semi-sentient races under the ground, and that's what Phil Schneider ran into. That these things are under the surface, and they're not allowed to come up here because of man's authority on the earth, is what I believe. So, but that's just a small part of Zero G's Part 1, because they're really not even a factor in the story yet. But they're just one other piece that is part of the deception to show us that these aliens, these cosmic benefactors, really have our best interests in mind.
So in general, these things come, save humanity from a crisis, portray themselves as the end time saviors that we've been waiting for, but we've been looking for the wrong thing because our religion has been twisted and away from the original message. And so we need to do away with all of the religion that came before and replace it with something else and something new.
Right. And so there's a new massive wave of enlightenment that's happening to the survivors that have come out of the meltdown, and that's where you have our characters. And really, we talked about the big picture stuff, Derek. My book actually deals mostly with characters and relationships and bickering and moms and school and how people don't get along. I know. So we're talking about these big, but where the book starts out is that the main character, Garrett, first person, is telling the story where him and his group of homeschooled, home churched friends are the last of a dying breed who are clinging to these things because their fathers or their mother, kept this through the whole meltdown. Now, Garrett's father was extremely wealthy because he was into robotics. He was a chief robotic scientist. He actually was into mining robots. That these are big things you get into. We're helping extract all sorts of resources from the earth. But he was a prepper, so he got ready for the meltdown, and so they were extremely wealthy and taken care of through the worst of everything. And Garrett was kind of sheltered from that, but his father knew it was coming. His father probably read Derek Gilbert's books, probably read Tom Horn's books, and so got Garrett ready for this.
So I hope he read Steve Quayle, because I don't know how much help I'd be. But
so as the story starts out, they are a last of the dying breed, so they have to maintain their faith and courage in an unseen creator when basically aliens are on the scene. They either were our creators or they were created, the same process we were. No one's really believing in the God of the Bible anymore, Derek. So everybody is going to start looking at anybody clinging to the old time religions as Neanderthals, as all of this comes online.
Well, and that's really, and I'm glad you went in that direction with your comments, because you're right. I mean, a lot of average to mediocre science fiction authors will rely on the gizmos or the technology. And I can speak to this from some, experience, having tried my hand at a few science fiction things and really, like, well, this really isn't very good, because now I can see I was depending on the gizmos instead of the characters to.
Well, you are
a
very talented fictional author. I've had the pleasure of reading some of your fictional effort, and I thought it was. And Sharon is fantastic, so I feel honored to even be interviewed by you. But speak to the A. So there's a whole bunch of that. When I'm researching and doing the research that I was. And I wanted to write a book, I knew right away I didn't need to write nonfiction, because you and Tom Horn and Steve and Michael Lake. Why do I need to write a nonfiction book? So when I knew it was going to be fiction, I thought one thing clearly: I am not going to beat a quick path to all of this conspiracy theory, because if you do that, it just comes off as a shallow plot line to get to conspiracy theory as quick as you can.
Right.
And this author needed an excuse to get all this stuff in, so I went the opposite direction. So when people start reading this book, I wanted it to be something that was creative, like Star Wars or Avengers, and you got into the characters and you wanted to know what happened to after the next nail-biting scene.
Right.
And then 8 chapters in, you got smacked with this Tom Hornism or the Steve Quaylism. Like, wait, that's what they've been talking about, and this is how it might actually unfold. So I endeavored to make a quality sci-fi story with characters you fall in love with. And that's why there's all these details about the gravitational phenomenon,
right?
The power exo armors, which don't talk. They're just a well thought out detail in the story.
And very timely, by the way, as Sharon and I on Sci Friday today, as we record this, just talked about the order placed by the U.S. Army for a new exoskeleton, which is sort of like the first step toward what you're writing about in Zero G's.
And I know by 2045, my designs might be a little conservative, but remember there was a 10-year meltdown, so it set everything back. But yeah, these armored suits that they're in are just disposable. If one gets destroyed, you just step out and you step in the next one. They don't talk or anything stupid like that. But it is an interesting angle to which to create a creative story where so I see why he wrote a fiction book is essentially what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a book that could hang on the shelf with Last Clash of the Titans by Derek Gilbert or a Tom Horn Exo Vatican and go, okay, and people would point to it and say, all right, that's a legit fictional story that goes with this other stuff. So that's what I attempted to do.
Well, and there's some really nice touches in there. For example, Garrett in the opening scenes, you learn something about the way he feels and the way he's still struggling to deal with the loss of his father. Wearing his father's old T-shirts, even though they're way too big for him, because they just remind him of his dad.
Right. And so he's struggling with that. I mean, his dad was his whole world. And so he's struggling with just his disappearance. Instead of just having it wrapped up with his proved death, he's just gone. So Garrett's trying to figure out how to deal with that. And then his friends, the struggle with his friends, Beck, the strong, heroic female lead, is always one step ahead of him mentally and spiritually. And so he always feels like he is playing catch up with her, which I think I can relate to that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And that doesn't end. Boy, wait till we get into book 2. But so it's about relationships, and his mom is a really, really strong female character who doesn't like to show emotion. So he's trying to deal with that too. But it really is just, I wanted to make it a tale where it starts out with them very young. So if and adults have got this, and my biggest fans have been moms so far. It looks like man cave sci-fi fodder here, but moms love it because it is all about the mom-son relationship, the father-son, the friends. And it does start out with them young, but boy, by the end of book 1, innocence is mostly lost. They go through some pretty trying times.
Well, as you would have to. I mean, good fiction requires that you put the characters under stress and then see how they react. And certainly when you're talking about end-of-the-world type stuff, you can't get much more stressful than that. You bring an interesting group in that I want to touch on here, because this is one that even a lot of ufologists haven't heard about, and that's the Collins Elite. I first heard about this when Nick Redfern published his book, Final Events, about 5 years, maybe it was longer than that, 7 or 8 years ago. I interviewed him after his book came out, and it is a concept that's coming back around. Well, I can't say any more about that, but we will learn more about this group in the months ahead. The Collins Elite, for people who aren't familiar with that group, who are they, and why did you want to include them in Zero G's?
Yeah, the shadowy organization of shadowy organizations.
Yeah.
Yes. So I feels like I read that book as well, that Nick Redfern's Final Events, and it's highly recommended for anybody into this subject matter. But essentially, it was a covert group of government, military, scientific personnel who were called together into Washington when Project Blue Book was fading away, struggling, because Project Blue Book was public and they were answering questions to the public. They couldn't answer these questions. They looked like kind of buffoons. They were tracking these craft. They were losing these craft. And who knows what they were really doing behind the scenes. But as that was fading away and they were deciding, well, this isn't working, they were discovering the likes of Aleister Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons were up to no good. And they were opening doorways through satanic rituals that may have been letting in entities into our realm. And they called together a new group of people to say, hey, maybe this just isn't extraterrestrial, faraway craft studying us like scientists. Maybe this is something evil and nefarious. So they called together a group of people, supposedly, into Washington, like 15 of them, and they began a covert Project Blue Book, where they started to really look at this phenomenon more from a demonic realm than a purely nature, scientific things are studying us from other worlds realm. And that was fascinating to me. So in my book, Zero G's, the main characters at the halfway point go from this youthful band of fighting heroes to, wait, these are the people who have been waiting for the alien saviors to show up here for multiple decades. And now they're exposed to this organization that says, we're tracking them. We know what they are, but they've got their own problems in my book. And so the main characters have to deal with violence, nonviolence for Christians. Exactly what do you engage in war? And of course, Garrett and Beck, the two lead characters, are arguing about that. And because, Garrett argues, did Joshua and Caleb just pray away the giants? And of course, Beck comes back and says, you're using that situation out of context. But again, as the time ticks down to
a good opportunity to get into some real theology there.
Yes, absolutely. So no matter what sci-fi blow 'em up things we might be talking about here, the book never strays from how do we stay close to God? How do we find our courage? What will happen when our faith is tested? How do we deal with our friends? And then how do we deal with violence, nonviolence, should all hell break loose on this earth? What are you allowed to open fire on and what you aren't you? But the Collins Elite is just a fascinating organization who really bears more researching, although they resist because they've never been public, so it's just rumors and innuendo.
We don't even know who the members of this group are.
No. Right. And so what do they think now? Are they still operating now? What did they discover? What hasn't been revealed? But I visualize what they would be like in the year 2045 as this last group of underground secret resistance bands ready to go toe to toe with these guys, and the characters run into them and have to decide what their place is and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, just let's talk about the real Collins Elite here for just a minute or two, because again, this is such a fascinating topic, and I'm glad you brought them in here because it starts people thinking about topics that as Christians we might not otherwise think about. UFOs, aliens, that's all woo, and we don't need to deal with that. But if this is a way to get
that's all I think about, Derek. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
to draw us into an alternate theology. Okay,
the real Collins Elite. I distracted you.
No, it struck me that the real Collins Elite and the information that did make it into the public domain through the work of Ray Boucher, who's a was Episcopal or
Anglican priest.
Okay, but also a ufologist of some renown.
Yes, he was a state director for Nebraska, state director for MUFON, and an Anglican priest.
So he was approached by somebody who was claimed to be part of this group, and they wanted some theological guidance, which I presume he provided. And as an Anglican priest, I assume he had some training and was able to share with them some solid theology. But based on what was then passed on to Nick Redfern in Final Events, it seemed like they either threw out what Ray said and drew a lot of their concerns about what these strange lights in the sky were all about, the UFO phenomenon, from ancient texts from the Middle East, from ancient Babylon. In fact, there was a book published around 1900, which Tom Horn has republished, Myths and Legends of Ancient Babylonia or something like that, or Demons and anyway, it's a book that's available from Skywatch TV. It's in the public domain now. And they were using that as sort of their guide for intel on what these things wanted. And their conclusion was that the only way to save our souls from these soul-sucking ETs was to go back under the Mosaic Law. At least that's what Nick Redfern was talking.
What a bomb that they dropped. Let's have a theocracy again to save humanity from the demons.
But my thought was this. What if that was just disinfo to put the word out there to the rest of the non-believing public that Christians really are dominionists and they really do want to take over the world?
Well, that is certainly an interesting angle, but just the fact that an official organization considered at some point forcing America to become a theocracy to save us from the devil made my eyebrows just shoot as high as they couldn't go. I got to read the story. There was an organization who really thought this from their research, from what they knew of Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley, that's the only way that they could shut the door was to force everybody. I mean, and it could be disinformation. We might not know, but maybe there's some deathbed Collins Elite confessions that are going to come out and clarify some of this, because it's certainly a fascinating story. Yeah, well, no question about that. So the series as a whole, how far do you project this to be? Trilogy, quadrology? Trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
But there might be a break off of that after that. But I can only focus on 1 week at a time right now. So book 2 is I'm trying to promise for it to be out by September 1st. But yes, I put a lot of. The first one took 4 years because it's a 416-page novel, but there's a 20-page illustrated insert in the center, so it's a first person. He's journaling the story. Garrett is journaling, but so he's also taking up sketching, and so it's his sketchbook that you get to see him sketching some of the police, the automated vehicles that they drive around on the highway. You don't drive anymore; you just get into these things and they drive you around. So he drives. He draws his. So his mom hates that. His mom wants him to concentrate on writing, and he's just sketching more and more. But so there's some fantastic mechanisms in this story. So if someone is, I'm not sure I'm into all that. I've heard from many people who bought the book that they can be reading this novel and they can turn to this and see what the plane looked like, see what the exo armor looked like. I mean, these are variable mode exo armors, and let me tell you what that means, because that's a technical term. They change from like a vehicle mode into an exo armor, and it actually all makes sense. I worked with a guy named Lucas Marangon who does official Star Wars designs, and he helped me bring these things to life so that they actually made sense, that all the parts could change and go over here and morph into this, and it still makes sense. And why do all that? Well, I'm a techno geek, 1. 2, I wanted to literally be able to know what I was writing about. So if Garrett got into this thing, what did its arm look like? What did its head look like? What color was it? So I just brought him to life. And after I had brought him to life and visualized every detail of them, I thought, well, why not include it in a creative way in the novel? So there's a little center section so people can flip to that and go, well, what's he talking about here? What's this? Yeah. What's this transport plane?
Well, I tell you, I am really, really impressed with this, because it is fully realized, and it is the kind of thing you would expect for like the early sketches for a major Hollywood film that involves these big machines that turn from one kind of thing into another kind of thing.
Oh, I've heard that in more than one place.
Yeah,
and definitely there's some video game company that's talking to me right now. They want to turn the whole thing. Who knows? Ooh, Derek, I just want, what though?
Yeah.
One thing we haven't touched, the reason I really ultimately wrote the book is because I love Father God, and I love, his word, and he sent his son to die for us. And to find him and to keep our salvation and to pursue him is the main thing. And the secondary thing that comes after that is, I think it goes back to the days of Noah, and that Noah was a pure human, perfect in his generations, and he all flesh had become corrupt then. I believe that at some point all flesh is going to become corrupted again. And so to add into the great quagmire that is the details we've discussed in this book, the main concern I have shows that the alien saviors are going to say that their DNA is like ours, but ours has been corrupted, and we need to get this nasty blood cancer that's taking out almost all of the population in the story. That we need to fix our DNA code, and this is the way that they did it, and they're going to help us do that. Well, it's going to be upgrading to humanity 2.0. Right. It's going to be loving our lives unto death, as the scripture says that we're not supposed to do, and not to corrupt our generations, to become less than human. Christ was fully human, to die for full humans, so that there was the plan for salvation. I think that the mark of the beast we don't know, I won't die on this theological hill, but I feel like it could be trading in our pure humanity for the great carrot, the great "you will surely not die" lie that will come at the end. So the characters in my book have to face not only all that we've talked about before, but when everybody's upgrading, extending their lives, saving themselves from this blood cancer that's going around, the fear of that. And so that's one other part of this story, is that towards the climax of this book, the upgrade is starting to be talked about.
And that's something that obviously will play with the emotions of the reader, because if you've gotten to that point in the book and you're really invested in the characters, their anguish over, do I do this? Do I not? What should I give up to save my children? What should I give up to save my family? Is a question that all of us may have to. Well, we may have to face someday. Certainly, our fathers and mothers in the faith. The Christians who were thrown to the lions in Rome, for example, had to face. At what point do you deny? I mean, how far will you go before you deny Christ in order to save what you have in this world?
Right. I mean, and talk about the great deception, how if it were even possible, the elect could be taken in from it, because when you say you're not going to give your child this upgrade and save this from a blood cancer, do you know what the population's going to look at you like? This is happening already. So just times that by, we have a few survivors that have come out of this meltdown in the story, and now we can save ourselves here, and you're not going to give your child this who's suffering.
Right.
Then okay, you need to be put out of the gene pool. You need to be taken out. You're evil. We need to take your children from you, and you need to be gone, because the messengers are saying, we have to become enlightened and to go into this new age and reach the stars like they do. Everybody has to be on board, hearts and minds. And so if someone doesn't want to take this upgrade, don't force them to do it, because we have to know who's not with us. So let them go, let them die off, get rid of them. And it starts out gentle at first, Derek, right? But when it starts to become violent and there's resistance, you can say, well, okay, what do we have to do to preserve our race? There's these reactionaries who are letting their own children suffer rather than to be saved. They're crazy. They have to be done away with.
Yeah.
And when it's clear that there's no God of the Bible anymore, right? And they're still clinging on to all this dogmatic, they're the only ones right, and we're not. Okay, they're insane. So they'll be doing evil and calling it good. And we know about the Blood on the Altar book that was produced by Defender that shows at one point the global church, quote unquote, say we have to get rid of the hardcore believers because they're crazy.
Yeah. It's not a pleasant thing to think about, but it's certainly what Jesus warned us about back in the day. We're not promised an easy road between here and Armageddon. Let's talk a little bit about the conferences coming up in the fall. And by the way, Darrin's book, his website is darringeisinger.com. Check the show notes at vftb.net, because there'll be a link there, and also put a link to where you can buy the book.
There's a killer coupon code right now too. So I with the conference coming up, I want this part 1 to get into as many hands as possible before book 2 comes out. So if you go on to darringeisinger.com and use the coupon code AB2019, you get 40% off the book right now. That's the biggest coupon I've ever offered.
That's a big deal.
So and that's to blow out my stock. So if people want to do that, it's a great time to get it. So AB 2019 on DarrinGeisinger.com.
All right. And I'll put that in the notes in case you're driving or doing something where you got eyes up and can't write down that note. Just check the show notes at vftb.net. And the reason I bring the conference in here is because obviously it deals with the same topic. How do we answer the alien question? That's the theme of the True Legends Conference, September 13th through the 15th in Branson at the Mansion Theater once again. Answering the alien question, how do we as Christians parse or make sense of this what appears to be overwhelming evidence of the existence of extraterrestrial life?
Right. So, yes, you mentioned at the start of the show that I am the coordinator for True Legends in Branson, and that's how I know Timothy Alberino. He's the director of True Legends, and Steve Quayle is our commander-in-chief. And Timothy Alberino, by the way, wrote the foreword to my book.
Yeah.
So the people want to check out what Tim wrote about my story, they need to check that out. But so Tim and I go back quite a ways, and we've been talking about this subject since before there was such a thing as the True Legends Conference. And so we've been grappling just what is the question first, let alone what is the answer to the alien question. And as you said, Derek, churches are just not talking about this. That does not keep the offering plates passing, bringing up the alien question. It's just not the subject matter for your average megachurch. So that's why True Legends offers this kind of information, because where else are you going to bring together experts from every field to try to make sense of this? Because some people say in your Facebook feed, it just says, well, everything's a demon. An alien is a demon. Don't be deceived. And then some people will say, well, there are physical entities out there. You can't. I believe it's extremely complex, and it's hard to get into just in like one program here. It's very complicated. And so that's why there's a whole conference devoted to try to answering it, because it's not just a pat meme that's going to answer everything. Because I don't believe what people considered aliens are all just demons, and because I believe in demons and unclean spirits, of course. I don't know if we want to get into actually answering the alien question, but demons and unclean spirits are extremely real. There are the spirits from the fallen ones before the flood, and they are our greatest enemy, really. I think they're far worse than the alien threat in some ways. They are, and as Apostle Paul said, that our battles with them. And I've had the pleasure and displeasure of rebuking an unclean spirit in the name of Jesus and it fleeing. That to me is one adversary, but I believe that, like Phil Schneider, he didn't get his fingers blown off in the Dulce Wars by a demon. There are physical, real entities. A general that's off the books and doesn't even exist officially told Steve Quayle one time that there are many different types of physical entities out there as there are types of insects. And there's groups called the Men of Valor who have to go into these hives and do away with them, like the giants that they found in the caves of Afghanistan. But they get all sorts of calls. Now, I don't know if that's mind-blowing to some listener. I don't know what we can believe. It's some of it's rumor and some of it's innuendo, but some of what these entities are, I think people are calling them aliens. I mean, if you read the work of Dr. Carla Turner and Dr. Jacobs, these were people who researched the alien abduction phenomenon, and there are people who are physically taken somewhere else, and they're dropped somewhere entirely different. There's marks on them. There's implants in their bodies. L.A. Marzulli showed the implant on one of his Watcher, a famous scene on one of his Watcher series. And so what are in the famous Betty and Barney Hill incident where they were taken and all these sexual experiments are done on them, and this is a reoccurring theme. This doesn't sound like now, could some of it be demons? Of course. I think it gets really complicated, and it might be above my pay grade to boil it down to a few sentences here. So you can take this discussion where you think it best for your listeners, Derek.
One of the things I think is interesting, and I appreciated that you all did this last year for the conference on transhumanism in the hybrid age, brought in perspectives that aren't necessarily approaching the topic from an Orthodox Christian perspective, but people who are trying to find the truth and doing it and following the evidence where it leads. For example, Richard Dolan, Dr. Hugo de Garis, both of whom will be back this year.
Yes. And George Knapp and Michael Schratt, and these are Black Projects researchers that have placed their eyes on some very interesting documents and evidence they will try to unpeel for people to make sense of things. But I'm very excited that Gary Stearman, I think your audience probably knows who Gary Stearman is. He's going to be, for the first time in his entire life, divulging secrets that his family, close personal family, was involved in reverse engineering crashed, quote unquote, alien craft in the Skunk Works projects and in the Black projects. And so that has been in a long negotiation to see if Gary would headline that Saturday night at True Legends and tell his personal story. And he's a pilot. And so he had an encounter with a UFO personally that he can tell us about, his eyewitness account of experiencing that. So that's all going to happen at True Legends this year. I would go to True Legends just to hear Gary's talk. Yes. Flat out. If you I don't need to say anything else. Well, there's a coupon code for that too. So if you go to gen6.com and use the coupon code ALIEN, you will get $15 off every ticket right now. So I think people should grab that. But that is remarkable, because Gary is one of those. He's like Tom Horn and like Steve Quayle in that they are on the cutting edge of topics that most churches don't want to deal with. And it's not because pastors don't get asked about them. I think in many cases they don't have the time. I've had a couple of pastor friends and had the opportunity to see the demands on their time a little closer than many folks might. And so I recognize that they just don't have the time to dig into this stuff like, weird people like me and Sharon and you and Tim and Steve, because we spend, our whole lives doing it. And thankfully, in both of our cases, we're married to women who are right on board with it. Mm-hmm. And the dinner time discussions at our house are really, really never normal.
No, but a lot of pastors don't have the time for that because they're dealing with the other aspects of pastoral care. Hearing problems about relationships and finances and depression and other things that pastors are called to do. So they don't have time to get into topics like this. So this, as an adjunct to a good, healthy church family, is essential, because these are things that are drawing people into other belief systems. The New Age movement is more than happy to put a spin on the UFO phenomenon or strange physics, and other things that we've talked about out there. The transhumanist movement, which is even now attracting people who call themselves Christians, and give them the benefit of the doubt. They say they're saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. Fine, but I don't see how that's consistent. This topic in particular. That's okay. You can sneeze or cough, whatever you got to do. We're relaxed here on this program.
I'm sorry, Derek.
No worries.
I had to cough.
No worries. We're low budget. If this were a real broadcast studio, there'd be a cough button on the desk in front of you, but we're not, so we don't.
I hope that's it. But I was tracking with you. I don't think churches are equipped or have the time to deal with it. I also don't think they want to deal with it. It's just
in some cases, right.
When I met Timothy Alberino and we started talking about the Gen 6, what really happened in Gen 6 compared to the garbage Sethite theory, and he started to lay that out for me, I had a flashback memory of being in a youth group when I was, 10 something, where I read in the scriptures where it said angels came down and mated with human women and have offspring. And I asked the youth director about it, and he looked at me and just, that was just when good people were starting to marry into bad people. And at 10 or whatever age I was, I said, he's lying. He's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then it all came back to me later when Tim and I started to break all this stuff down. So I just think that, again, churches are uncomfortable and they have to lie because they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. It's a simpler answer, and because then you don't have to then get into the additional questions that you get, like how is it possible? Because I got an email the other day. Can you explain to me biologically how? No, I can't. Right. The Bible said it happened, but I rabbit trailed off my point, which is that how much I respect guys like Gary Stearman, Tom Horn, Steve Quayle, who are willing to tackle these topics and yet still hold a very conservative overall theological view of sin and salvation. Right. We are not going to deal with the alien question and say that, oh yes, this is part of God's plan for getting us saved. These extraterrestrials are really, no, none of that. We're saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, and there is no other way to get to the Father. It's just, how do we fit the rest of this weird stuff into a worldview that begins there?
Yeah, there was a large swath of time where I think that a lot of the pure-hearted church-going public didn't need to know about some of this conspiracy theory stuff, because you just need to pursue the Savior, repent, follow the commandments, and love Yeshua, Jesus Christ, and you are going to go to heaven. You don't need to know that giants once ate people to go to heaven. So the main thing is still important, and I don't want to ever muddy people's thinking into going off into rabbit trails where they don't really need to go. However, I believe that we're coming into a time where all this is going to start to really come up again. I mean, Pember in his 1872 book said that one of the signs of the end times was going to be beings from another sphere coming back again and mingling. And we have the scripture in Daniel, they will mingle their seed with the seed of men.
Right.
So at some point, there were parents, let's just break it down, Derek. There were parents who did not have to tell their kids about this stuff because they were going to live, have their own show, and die without having a lot of this. Transhumanism wasn't going to affect them. What happened in Genesis 6 wasn't going to happen. The alien question. Guess what? I think it's that the time is ending. I can't look at my kids and say, you're not going to ever have to deal with becoming less than human. Transhumanism, you're going to have to deal with that. So we don't have the luxury anymore of like the mega church to just say, this is esoteric fringe information. So.
Well, you brought up the book of Daniel. It's springtime in the Ozarks. Don't worry about it. This is how we deal with it.
I am so okay. Let that be the last one, please, Father. Let that be the last cough. Springtime in the Ozarks. That's right.
Yeah, Daniel wrote that knowledge, people would rush to and fro, knowledge would increase, and until the last century, really, when we saw the rate of technological development, advancement increasing at an ever increasing curve. I mean, the curve is almost vertical right now in terms of technological advancement. That wasn't the case. I mean, up until the latter part of the 19th century, which you could maybe pin this on the Spiritist movement, followed by Blavatsky, followed by Crowley, as you brought more of that into acceptable society. The elites in the U.S., Europe, UK began to get into this the Spiritist movement, spiritualist movement, and which is making a comeback in the UK, by the way, and following these self-proclaimed ascended masters, or followers of the ascended masters like Blavatsky. Things really hadn't changed a whole lot around the world in terms of technology, for thousands of years. I mean, that's painting with a broad brush, of course. I mean, gunpowder was a big deal, obviously, and stuff like that. But until you got into the 19th century, up until that point, I mean, people were still using animals to get around and for most power, and most homes were lit by fire. So it really, the last 150 years has just seen an almost unimaginable change as we look back now from first quarter of the 21st century. I'm old enough to remember black and white TV, but only barely, And
Derek, let's ask ourselves, what's causing this technological race?
Exactly my point.
And when, you talk about the Collins elite and their suspicions that ETs, quote unquote, weren't, from extraterrestrials from another galaxy, that perhaps they were masquerading as something else. And you take the rumors and legends of the Roswell incident where craft were crashed and they were recovered parts. So Gary Stearman is going to be talking to True Legends about reverse engineering. Well, that means you got parts from it. This is nuts and bolts craft. This isn't demons floating around as misty vapors. This is bits. So the book, The Day After Roswell by Colonel Corso, is a very interesting read, and I believe him. And he was dropped on his desk a whole bunch of parts, and they said go. And so his family was probably the same part of this. Now, from that, the microchip, fiber optics, flak jackets, night vision. If you're just taking a quick list of some of the things that supposedly were born out of these crashed craft, to me, and my theory, and perhaps the Collins elite as well, this smells like a Trojan horse. It smells like a gift stuffed with goodies, and we're going to crash it. And not only will mankind take this stuff, essentially it's like a bottle of whiskey and some dynamite and some matches and for our whole race. Because when you start to, what has been born out of that technology? How have we increased and sped toward the end via these high-tech things? So we're going to stuff it in a box. We're going to crash it there. Not only will they develop all this and bring about their own doom, they're going to think that they're a real alien ET, extra, and so now the belief in one God and that man is special and our world is special is going to dissolve. And if you look at the surveys in the 1920s of what people thought is there ETs? Are there UFOs in other worlds? I mean, it was like 20s, it was like 30% of people. Now it's almost no one doesn't believe that. Everybody knows that we're not alone, right? Well, what? So twofold: technical knowledge, it will increase. And they gave us all that stuff. And also the belief in that man is special and that our world is special is also decreased. We're just one bit of phytoplankton created by chance on this huge, mass, ever-expanding universe. And so look at how it's just ticking us down to the end. And, I remember rumors of another time that beings from another sphere handed down knowledge that meant our own doom. And I think that was in Genesis 6, in the book of Enoch, outlays that they taught us warfare and makeup to induce lust and to psychedelic drugs and to worship them as gods instead of the true God. So we basically just have another influx of forbidden knowledge handed to mankind in the forms of these crash craft, and we know where this is headed, Derek. We can read the end of the book, right? And I'm not talking about mine or your book. I'm talking about the book.
Right. Yep. And spoiler, God wins. So Zero G's Part 1, The Armor Eternal, a look at how this might play out in a very creative fashion. Again, Darrin's website, darringeisinger.com. And we encourage you to go there because the promo code
AB 2019.
AB 2019 gets you 40% off the novel right now as we lead up to the True Legends Conference in September, which is answering the alien question. Featured speakers besides Steve Coyle, Timothy Alberino, L.A. Marzulli, Chase Kletsky, well-known UFO investigator, really interesting person. Got a chance to sit next to her at dinner and talk to her at the conference last September. Really enjoyed that. Richard Dolan, who also was a real delight to get to know. Michael Schratt, aerospace historian, Dr. Hugo DeGaris, and George Knapp, an investigative reporter, and of course our friend Gary Stearman, who will share some information that he's never before revealed about his own family's involvement, the very famous Stearman aircraft family. I didn't know this when I was going to college, small little college in Galesburg, Illinois. I didn't realize the significance of Galesburg, which hosts the annual Stearman Fly-In.
I know the reaction after we announced the Stearman and that his family was long time into avionics. There was more than a few folks who said, "Oh, I never put that together." That Gary Stearman was. So everybody is kind of on pins and needles. I would get your tickets to True Legends soon because with the Gary Stearman announcement and the coupon code, the Alien, for $15 off every ticket, that is making it. You can almost watch the tickets sell out right now. So go to gen6.com and get your tickets. And who else is going to be at True Legends is the Derek Gilbert is going to be there in the pivotal role that, I mean, it couldn't go on without you, Derek. So of course we're not going to do that.
I get to be the traffic cop. Just keep the speakers moving across the stage and stand out of their way. Well, enjoyed the conversation, Darrin. Always enjoy the conversation. We're glad you're out here in the Ozarks now, but we need to get together more often.
We do. We
got a group around here that we just need to go for more barbecue.
Well, and as soon as life stops being so busy.
Tell me when that is. I'll get back to you around September. Darrin Geisinger, and we'll be back as we continue View from the Bunker after this. A new take on the prophesied war of Gog and Magog. Forget about Russia coming from the uttermost parts of the north. The enemy foreseen by the prophet Ezekiel is so much bigger and so much older. It's Last Clash of the Titans by Derek P. Gilbert, a #1 new release in Amazon's Christian history category. Last Clash of the Titans breaks down step by step how Greek mythology grew out of Canaanite religion, why the old gods of the Greeks, the Titans, were the Watchers who descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, and why the Titans will return from the abyss for one final battle against God, Armageddon. Last Clash of the Titans, backed up by peer-reviewed academic research. Tom Horn calls this book stunning. Last Clash of the Titans, the second coming of Hercules, Leviathan, and the prophesied war between Jesus Christ and the gods of antiquity. Get it as part of a special offer at skywatchtvstore.com and available now in paperback and as a Kindle ebook at amazon.com. Driving the internet to think. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert, and as we said earlier, still not too late to sign up for the streaming video from the Hear the Watchman conference, although most of the attendees have already headed home by the time you hear this. Sharon and I will be on a plane Monday morning to return home and back to our humble abode in the Ozarks. But you can still sign up to get the video for up to 6 months. See all of the presentations from the just completed Hear the Watchman conference in Dallas, and take advantage of the opportunity to show some of these videos to your friends. Expose your Bible study to it. See great speakers like Russ Dizdar, L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Michael Lake, Pastor Paul Begley, of course, myself, Stephen Bankarsk, Josh Peck's co-author of The Second Coming of the New Age, and Gary Wayne, last week's speaker, or guest rather, here on A View from the Bunker, Irvin Baxter of End Times Ministries, and more. For information, log on to hearthewatchmen.com. That's hearthewatchmen.com. Next week, here on A View from the Bunker, we talk about a new conference that Sharon and I honored to be a part of, coming to San Antonio in October. This is the Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference. Adrian Appleberry of I-4029 Ministries, which is a reference to Isaiah 40:29, putting this together, and we'll talk with him about the conference. Guest speakers there, besides Sharon and me, and Sharon will be speaking at this conference, so you don't want to miss that. Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Carl Gallups, Bill Salas, Jim Barfield, director of the Copper Scroll Project, Paul McGuire, and more. Special music by John Schlitt, lead singer of Petra back in the day. All of that at the Grand Hyatt in San Antonio, that's down on the Riverwalk, and an absolutely gorgeous location, wonderful hotel, and just an incredible lineup. We are honored to be a part of this. Hey, as a special bonus, Pastor Billy Crone, almost forgot about that. Luncheon with the speakers on Friday. Pastor Billy Crone will speak on Saturday, L.A. Marzulli, and then on Sunday, Sharon and I honored to speak together. We're sort of tag team, a little talk there during the luncheon on Sunday. So we hope we can see you there. For information, log on to unsealedscroll.org. That's unsealedscroll.org for the Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference. And use the promo code Gilbert20, that's Gilbert20, to save yourself 20% off the cost of the tickets and any of the luncheons if you choose to take advantage of those. Again, unsealedscroll.org for those. Of course, the True Legends Conference, which Darrin Geisinger is the coordinator for, that'll be at the Branson, the Mansion Theater in Branson, September 13th through the 15th. The theme, Answering the Alien Question. So essentially a weekend devoted to the topic that we've just spent the last hour or so covering here on A View from the Bunker. So take advantage of that while you have an opportunity. Gen6.com is the website, GENSIX.com. Featured speakers besides Steve Quayle and Timothy Alberino, of course, L.A. Marzulli, Richard Dolan, Dr. Hugo DeGaris, George Knapp, investigative reporter, Chase Kletsky, a respected ufologist, and more. For more information, log on to gen6.com. And yours truly, I'm honored to serve as the Master of Ceremonies at this event. So we're looking forward to being there again. Sharon will be there as well. And once again, I'm advised we'll have a table right there by the door. So you can't miss us on your way in or out of the front door there at the Mansion Theater at the True Legends Conference. So again, this kind of a special program, a little shorter than usual, but hopefully the content makes up for the length. Next week, we'll be back live as we talk with Adrian Appleberry here on A View from the Bunker. Meanwhile, if you would be so kind, leave us a review on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else you find us, which is, of course, wherever fine podcasts are sold, or give us a like at our Facebook page, View from the Bunker Facebook page, facebook.com/View from the Bunker, which is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. That's www.incompetech.com. Our announcer, D.C. Good. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.